We got the headline number. What else did they have to say?
Well, like Jeffrey, maybe it's not a big surprise that they cut the forecast. What's surprising is how pervasively pessimistic this report is. If you're a regular reader of these things, across the board, just about every country and region, they cut the forecast. Japan cutting in half from 1% growth in 2016 to 0.5%, seeing Japan go into a contraction in 2017. The UK forecast was cut because of uncertainty over the whole Brexit issue. The only bright spot in the report was a slight raising of the forecast in China, because that's that country's been coming out a little bit better than thought lately. But even with that, it's still, the rebound in growth that they're predicting for 2017 and beyond hinges on emerging markets having a bounce back, and they give a lot of risks to the outlook.
But I think you put your finger on it, Scott. There's a lot of, if this happens, then things will be worse. So if Japan, does institute the consumption tax, then we're going to see a contraction. If Brexit happens, then we're going to see regional turmoil. These things are less likely to happen than perhaps 50%. So can we take this as a glass half full? If these things don't happen, then things won't be this bad.
You can read it as glass half full or glass half empty. This strikes me as more of a glass half empty report, even though they are predicting a rebound. They just list a lot of risks, and on top of that, a rebound could also. They really practically begging countries to take further fiscal action, keep monetary policy loose, and to consider structural reforms to really get growth going in the coming years, or else, as they say, we're going to slip into secular stagnation.
Matt Miller, the first question a lot of people ask on trading floors as soon as they see an IMF headline is how behind the curve is the International Monetary Fund. That forecast of 3.2% for global growth from 3.4%. Where are the economists on Wall Street right now?
We're looking at, the median forecast here is about 3.3%, you can see there. But the high forecast, you can see way up here at 5.5 or more. And you can see the low forecast here at 2. You can see this with ECFC on your Bloomberg terminal.
So, Jeff, I want to come back to you, because one of the problems I have with this, we're making the forecast a quarter of the way into the year. And we haven't been doing those kinds of numbers so far this quarter. Certainly in the United States, we haven't been doing anything close to 2.4%. That means you've got to make up that difference in the last 3 quarters, which makes this existing forecast questionable to me from the beginning.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying at the end of the last block is that you've had some very weak data coming out of Q4, Q1 for the U.S., so big expectations on the Q2 data. So certainly the IMF cutting the forecast is not a surprise, but the market's focus is going to be much more for the U.S. outlook, which obviously ties into the global outlook to a significant degree, to the Q2 rebound and a lot of expectations. So we've had these seasonal effects for the last 5 or 6 years where Q1 is weak, Q2 is strong. Now, for a lot of the reasons, that's been blamed on winter weather. So what's really unique about this year is, hey, we had a very warm winter. So where's the winter weather effect? So people are relying on the seasonal adjustments, the residual in terms of inventory and government spending to sort of explain away the first quarter and hope for this very strong second quarter. So the market's focus is going to be a lot less on this IMF forecast and a lot more on kind of the high frequency data that we're going to get not really soon, because we're still coming out of the last month's data. We're still looking at March data. But when we start to get into that April data, there's going to be a lot of focus on, are we seeing in the high frequency data the Q2 response that we're expecting?
Yeah, and perhaps informing that is the larger backdrop. Larry Summers has been talking about secular stagnation. In fact, we had him on the program. We talked about, let's play that, because the IMF is echoing that now.
I think we have negative rates because of some deep issues in our economies, the set of issues and arguments that I've talked about when I've talked about secular stagnation, having to do with the chronic excess of saving over investment.
So this goes to Larry's theory that the IMF now is really buying into, it appears, that there is excessive savings, that people are saving the money rather than spending it, which is going to affect growth.
Yeah, and Larry's been talking about that for a long time, and there's a debate about whether or not his perspective is right. I think when we get to the IMF response and the global policy response, we've had this persistence slow growth. The issue from this longer-term backdrop is really what can policy do and what's the right policy prescriptions. We're going to hear more about that, I'm sure, and talk more about that. That's a very long topic, but that's the broader backdrop, is what, if anything, can policy do around that, and really has monetary policy done as much as it can. What Larry also talks a lot about is the need for fiscal policy, the need for infrastructure. Obviously, that's highly political, so it's hard to create with as much, as rapid as monetary policy can. But that's really where the focus of the shift of policy is going to move.
Give someone a global growth forecast on a trading floor and they'll say thanks but no thanks. I need the regional breakdown, so I'm going to give you the regional breakdown, because this is what's interesting to me. We come into 2016 very pessimistic on China, somewhat optimistic on the US. The IMF right now, though, lift the lid on that global forecast, raising 2016 China growth forecast to 6.5% from 6.3%. But it's the pessimism on the US, cutting the 2016 US growth forecast to 2.4 from 2.6. And I think a lot of people, Matt, will look at that forecast and say, 2.4? Really? Yep. From what we've seen so far?
Right. So 2.4 and the 2016 median forecast from all these sources, by the way. So that puts together all of the banks on Wall Street, plus the World Bank, the IMF themselves, OECD, European Commission, is just too flat, right? And we're looking at only a climb to about 2.25 in 2017, back down to 2.2 in 2018. So the median forecast from Wall Street and the NGOs together is only 2 even for 2016.
Thanks, Matt.
It's a great tool. It's a great tool, ECFC.
ECFC, definitely going to take it out. What did you make of the Treasury Secretary's comments to the IMF, basically, that it needs to be more aggressive when it comes to exchange rate policies and so forth?
Well, you know, that's long been the remit of the IMF. You know, the exchange rate policies have kind of moved a bit to the backdrop. You know, that so much of that focus has been on China, and I think what we've seen out of the policy community is really a bit of backpedaling on that. That stability around currency is more important to the outlook than liberalization, free market setting of currencies, because of what we saw happen, for example, in January and February of this year. When you saw some of the currency volatility spread throughout the market, there was a bit of a pullback there. Now, on the flip side of that was the big pushback to the BOJ around the imposition of negative interest rate policy and not having negative interest rates fully directed at currencies as the core of monetary policy. So a couple of mixed messages and different messages around there when it comes to global currency management.